Okay, thanks everyone. And so I now call upon the Prime Minister to open this debate.
All right, give me 2 seconds. Got a lot of pieces of paper. That's so true. Keep it. Okay, I like visible background. All right, starting in 3, 2, 1. Speaker, today you have a choice between 4 worlds. We are going to prove to you unequivocally why one of them is the better world to be born into, why one of them is the world that will allow you to self-actualize, one of them is the world that will allow you to live a relatively normal life in comparison to like pretty awful alternatives that are being offered to you by the other sides of the house in this debate. Pretty like simple, I think, 4 things in this speech. Firstly, some setup in terms of what the world of the Hunger Games looks like and why this is the preferable world to live in. Secondly, why the world of The Last of Us is a horrible world to live in. Thirdly, Zootopia, finally onto Pokemon. Pretty simple structure. I'll start out with some setup then in terms of what the Hunger Games looks like. We think that, like, look, in the Hunger Games, you have like a couple of options. You could be born by via lottery birth. You could be born into the capital, like the center of power that controls like a lot of money. If you were born into the capital, that's a great life. We'll let you have that. Sure. Or you could be born into like a poorer district. This probably means you have you know, your job is like in some ways subsistence based. You have one of like the 13 different industries that you could have. We think this is like a pretty good allegory for our world for a reason, right, Speaker? Like the Hunger Games is just like about as bad as living in like living in the world as in our world as a person most of the time. We think it's possible for you to live like a relatively normal life. Why is this the case? Because we tell you that like the issues that the Hunger Games world has like are structural inequalities and they are solvable, right? We point to the fact that like it is possible for the districts to lead an uprising against a very small central state. We tell you that because like there are 13 districts, they are relatively like connected by the fact that they have to like, you know, exchange resources between each other. We tell you that this means that they're probably like structurally able to revolt. Obviously, like I don't think I'm allowed to bring in the fact that they do, but like they do. We think that like that is also true. But what this means then is we think that these issues are perfectly solvable, but even if they weren't, we tell you that because the Hunger Games is a lottery, right? It means that it is also possible to live like a relatively normal life in this world. You can have like a partner, you can have kids without ever being selected for the Hunger Games. In this world, like on the counterfactual, like this is probably about as bad as living in the actual world. I'm going to explain to you why the other 3 worlds are worse. Before that, I'll take closing if you have a POI.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it easier to fight oppression when the government is oppressing you or when it's just vague structural forces?
Okay, so like the government is oppressing you in the Hunger Games, sure. Structural forces are oppressing you in the Hunger Games, sure. I'm going to prove to you why it is so much worse in every single other world. Like the world that you have to cop in The Last of Us, in Zootopia, in Pokemon are so much worse. Also, like additional benefits that I forgot about for the Hunger Games. Like firstly, we think it has like a structure, right? Which means it has rules that you can learn from and then like you can develop ways to survive. Also, as like kind of just an like ancillary benefit, you might get to choose between a hot blonde boy and a brunette boy. We think that's pretty good. You might get some cool weapons. So then why is The Last of Us, as like the other kind of human world here, like worse to live in? This is like quite self-explanatory, right, Speaker? We tell you that like your life is very, very bad. We tell you that like most people die, you will be bitten by a zombie, you will contract the fungus, or at best you will be alive and you will be ruled by like a despotic governing system. We tell you it's really hard to avoid the harms that are so prevalent in The Last of Us world. We think it's really hard to avoid like spores, it's really hard to avoid zombies, and we tell you this probably looks like having to like watch your loved ones suffer from these really inevitable harms as well. Like stress here that even if you don't buy that these harms are just like inherently worse, like at least in the Hunger Games you get a 1 in 24 chance of winning. Like even here, if you like can't buy that these harms in The Last of Us are worse, it's still worse here because you cannot fix them, right? You can't cure the zombie fungus for 3 reasons. Firstly, you do not have like the technology to create. Like the fact that this virus has devastated the world means that like there is no capacity for society to bounce back. There is no society to do like sci-tech advancements that you might be hoping for, which means then that there is no cure here. We tell you that like it took years, like millions of years for us to develop civilization without a virus that was like ravaging the world. We think it's going to be the case here. So moving on then to talk about like the 2 children's cartoons in this, and let's like be real here. These are 2 children's cartoons, Speaker, which means you have to cop one of 2 things. Firstly, if you are willing to buy that these are worlds which are children's cartoons, you have to live by the rules of children's cartoons. This means your emotions are severely restricted. This means you probably can't do things like talk about things that wouldn't be rated PG. Like these are probably really awful existential harms, right, Speaker? But if like that's not allowed, if we have to buy that like at their best what these worlds look like, let's talk about why these are still really awful things. So, Zootopia. Why is Zootopia such a terrible place to live? Zootopia is a cartoon universe where you as a human being are coexisting with cartoon anthropomorphized animals. At best, you are a cartoon human. You are still like the only cartoon human in this universe, right, speaker? You are a minority of one, and you are completely different to every other animal in this world. At worst, you are a human being like me, and you are like in a world with cartoon animals. That's pretty bad. But even if you are like a cartoon human, why is this still like an awful outcome? Couple of reasons, right? Firstly, you have a human mind, you have a human body. These things work differently to the anthropomorphized animals that you are around, right? Like the reason that human society is so complex is because we have like extremely complex social needs and social structures. Animals cannot meet these cannot create these social structures for you. What this means then is like you think, feel, and act differently. You have different instincts, you have different drives to do different things. You probably are going to really struggle to find like family. You're never going to be able to find a partner. You're probably going to have really like a terrible struggle to find friends, right? Like these are really awful harms. This means you're going to have a really terrible, really lonely life because you are so vastly different. And again here, speaker, the reason this is worse is because you cannot escape these harms. These harms are like in this instance inherent to you. You cannot have a family or friends. You are probably like shunned or discriminated against, because we know within the Zootopia world, like discrimination does exist. But even if I can't bring that knowledge in, like we think that you just like can't have family or friends. You're shunned and discriminated against because you are literally the only person in the world who are like acts and behaves and looks the way that you do. We tell you you can't fix this because this is literally about you, right? There is nothing you can do to change this, no matter how much you like become like the other animals, no matter how much you assimilate into Zootopia society. Like we tell you you're going to have a really lonely life. You're not going to be able to like meaningfully communicate with anyone there. So finally, to Pokemon. Why is Pokemon such an awful world to live in? Two reasons, right? First reason is this is a really terrifying reality in which there are 10-year-olds who have captured gods who are running around in their pocket with like Palkia and Dialga as space and time, speaker. This is a really significant existential threat, which is probably arguably worse than anything in any of the other three worlds in this debate. Like we tell you that like at the point at which 10-year-olds could control the essence of the ocean and space and time, this was not a world you wanted to live in. This was incredibly dangerous. The Pokemon world was under existential threat almost constantly. And again, you could not like remove these things. These legendary Pokemon were built into the world. You could not remove them without removing space and time and probably precipitating the collapse of that world. We think that like as a child born into the Pokemon, you could be like born as a child going on your Pokemon journey at best, which means at 10 years old, you are thrust out from your home to go and like chase gods around. At worst, you are like Nurse Joy and you have no choice at like the occupation or the world in which you live. We think that these are like three really awful realities. So what we bring you on Opening Gov is we bring you a world where you can self-actualize, we bring you a world where you can have a semblance of a normal life and you can fix the problems that are going to cause you harm. For all of those reasons, vote Opening Gov.
I thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech and call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open the opposition bench.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's really important to engage with our case as charitably as possible. You will have more autonomy in this world where you live in The Last of Us. But even if you're captured by life of the zombies, that is still preferable. We are the only team who will take their world at its very worst and we will win the debate. Setup. First point in setup is what it looks like to live in our world. You are born in a safe place, likely, because to be born, there probably needs to be some person to give birth in an environment that isn't swarming with zombies, but also it is likely that there's a cure on the way, structurally for two reasons. The first is that scientists often find one another and are able to collaborate and work with one another to find some sort of change. Second, genetic evolution allows people to overcome some of the problems of infection. That is that some people are entirely immune from the cold or from influenza in our world. That can translate to the world of The Last of Us. And we can develop off of those genes, and we can and those people pass it around, and it can be studied, and it can lead to changes into the future. But even if there is no cure on the way, we can still win this debate. Second point of setup is that Opening Government misunderstands or does not do the debate properly. They say that there's no cure in our world, but in the Last of Us movie there was a cure. But they fiat also in the Hunger Games that there's a rebellion. So either it's the world of the movies and the world of the TV shows, or it's not. We would say that it's not. It's just the info slide. We're doing the debate as it normally should be done at Fictional IV. Let's then move to what it looks like in the world of the other teams. Opening government, where the Hunger Games is where people are controlled by a state that literally not genocides, but takes children away and kills them. This is slavery. I'm not sure if people noticed, but you are subject to the state. You must work for the state. You don't earn an income. The state takes away the resources that you've used and rations that out if they would like to. If you try and run away, you are taken to the capital. Your tongue is probably ripped out, or sorry, that's imported from the movie, but you probably are punished in an incredibly disastrous way in order to maintain control over these 13 states and also stop rebellion. Usually, slavery and also serfdom is the only way to ensure that rebellion does not work. So the capital in this debate structurally will necessarily have to oppress its people quite significantly. But closing government, you have Zootopia. My guy, it might seem nice to go to Zootopia because everyone smiles, but like these are, nothing else is in the info slide except they're just animals. So like they could just literally be just tigers. It could just they could just eat you. But also you're an alien. So to the extent that they actually have developed an anthropomorphised society that is similar to our world, which is not given in the info slide, you're picked apart. You're killed. You're like an alien that is in Area 51. It is unclear that you live a good life under closing government. But also closing opposition. Do you have actors who are able to now have monopolies on violence in an incredibly disastrous way? Mewtwo and Arceus, or any sort of Pokemon that is a legendary, what does legendary mean? It probably is that they have immense amounts of power. They could destroy massive amounts of areas. This is like nuclear weapons in the hands of people who can capture these Pokemon or train these Pokemon. That is harmful because it means that there's constant war going on. It also means that in the event that someone has enough Pokemon that are so powerful, they can use that to control others. That is that states are more oppressive or individual warlords are so oppressive. Imagine if you had this, like the world that you lived in were just controlled by people who, many people had different nuclear weapons because the legendary could do things like just blow everything up. So clearly we think that the closing opposition world is, as open government suggests, the worst world in this debate. Let's talk about two issues then. Firstly, why you enjoy your life more under our side, but secondly, why zombie life is preferable. But before that, I'll take a point of information from closing. Opening.
The level of violence that you could be subjected to in the worst cases, the act of having to watch your family be ripped apart by zombies is surely just as bad, if not worse, than the brutality of the state in the Hunger Games.
Thank you. I'll now move on to arguments. So why you live your life more enjoyably. This is important because, and I would suggest that you live more, you have a little bit more autonomy in this world because, and this is important because life has actually no meaning. It is that you are a speck of dust in the universe. Choices liberate us and give us happiness and meaning. To have some sort of control in your life, even if there are forces of nature imposed on you, other people making choices for you is harmful, which is inherent to all the other worlds in this debate. You are free of human control or any other actor's control. And maybe you become a zombie, but I don't think you do. Why is it that you are unlikely to become a zombie? The first is that you can live safely. You are born in an area which means that you are able to be away from major populated centers, such that these Last of Us zombies don't have an interest in finding you. There are major population centers probably elsewhere, which they conglomerate around. That's the reason why they are probably likely to roam around cities as opposed to roam around in the countryside, because it's just inefficient for the mycelium to do that. But secondly, you probably have information on how to avoid this. That is that you're probably born by and maybe raised by someone. They could explain to you how to avoid them. That is that don't make sound. That is that you can live safely. The second thing to say about the more enjoyment in your life is that states and societies have collapsed, which means that you can migrate and do as you like. The authorities and bandits that might harm you are too dispersed. They're far too weak. They cannot do things like drive out and find you, an individual person to control you. Whereas under a world where you have like a flying animal that is in Pokemon world, that is that they can control you more. But also you can access an immense amount of resources like food, water, shelter, and entertainment. Why is this structurally true? The first reason why it's structurally true that you can access all of these needs and benefits is because the world overproduced its goods necessarily. That is that often capitalism in a world before any of the destruction had happened necessarily produces quite a lot. That is the reason why we waste 4 billion tons of food every single year, despite the fact that there's a food scarcity. It's not about whether or not we have enough food or enough energy or enough resources. It is about distribution. And it is likely you are able to access some of these resources, even if it means traveling to get those resources. But also, the population count has reduced. So no one else is using these resources. You can use them for your own benefit. Let's talk about why zombie life is preferable. This is preferable because firstly, you are likely to be able to live forever. But secondly, you are divorced from any sort of pain whatsoever. You do not feel hunger anymore. You don't feel loss. You don't feel sadness anymore. So even if you are captured by zombies, this is beneficial. You do not feel the sadness and depression of slavery, which the Hunger Games must contend with. You do not feel the sadness of solitude and loneliness that Zootopia demands that you experience. It is preferable to feel no pain. But thirdly, you are in a collective. Mycelium necessitates connection to everyone. You can feel each other. You have a community, which leads me to the fourth benefit of why zombie life is preferable. You can contribute to humanity's unity in ending war, ending genocide, ending sexism and racism, because all of these Last of Us mushroom people, they are unlikely to care about all of those things. And you can feel good about destroying some of the most destructive things that have led to genocides and devastation in history. Clearly, this is a more preferable side. Cheers.
I thank the leader of the opposition for that fine speech and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the government bench.
Whoop. Hello. Cool. All right. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. The world of the Hunger Games is not that one that is that unlike from what a medieval peasant might have lived. It is not unlike what that of people that have been often lived historically through subsistence or through, for instance, Victorian England industrialization lived through. And those people had actually relatively fulfilled lives. They had family, they had friends. Obviously, things could have been significantly better, but the things that made their lives meaningful and the things that humanity have historically turned to make our world better is the bonds to the people we have around us. Is our capacity to have friends. We lose that in Zootopia. It is our capacity to not do harm to our friends, to not be harmed ourselves. We lose that under The Last of Us. It is in our capacity to have that world. We lose that at all under Pokemon. Firstly here, recharacterization on what exactly the Hunger Games world is likely to look like. Because we know, even to the extent that people do work contributing towards this economy, even to the extent to which people are, to some extent, forced to engage with that work, we do know that we know that firstly, given that all of society functions in this way, there must be to some extent some degree of there cannot be consistent or constant oppression of individuals, right? We see that probably people do exist on the margins. They are able to some extent operate their lives in the way they wish. You cannot simply surveil a population that is that large when you do not have access to particular types of resources. Your likelihood of being taken into the Hunger Games and to face those particularly harsh threats is incredibly small. And we know that in the event that happens to someone you love, you have a far greater capacity to look away than you do the harms that will accrue in the other worlds. We also know that kind of community and that kind of building is something that just humans are able to look to in terms of our capacity to make life meaningful. People look back at the world, they can say that they had incredibly meaningful lives, because of the people they talked to, because of the people that were their friends, people that were their family, the people that they loved. Those are the things that people value incredibly highly. We know that seeing those people, you're also quite unlikely to see those people harmed directly, given that this is a society that seems to be relatively functional and self-sufficient. If it is not in those things, if it has entrenched economic problems, that is merely an indication of the fact that society is likely to collapse and something more equitable to come about due to that, whereas there is no existential threat as there is in The Last of Us. Why specifically is The Last of Us a particularly harsh world, rebutting to what Jerry told us? A few things. Firstly, they told us that you live in a community and that community is relatively safe. Unfortunately, that community is probably not safe simply for the reason that like fungi are like auxotrophic, like heterotrophic, right? Like fungi have to be continuously bringing in new material. They do not live off the sun. They do not photosynthesize. That means that fungi have a requirement to continuously be consuming more. That is why actually the zombies are incredibly unlikely to stay in the city, right? Even then, even if the zombies are simply autonomous, we know that zombies traditionally kind of wander relatively freely, and there are also spores that are able to be dispersed by things like the wind. When you get incredibly large amounts of biomass in a city or something like that, you get incredibly large amounts of spores being produced. Also by evolution, the most aggressive fungi will then go into those new areas. The ones that can seek out those particular small communities are the ones that will evolutionarily succeed in those areas. You are in, not simply humans are evolving, you are in a fungal arm, you're in an evolutionary arms race also with the disease itself that is causing zombies. It is also attempting to beat you. That's why humans haven't evolved to be immune to every disease in the world, right? Why we still get things, why, for instance, the Black Plague was able to wipe out a fourth of Europe. It's simply like, that's simply like evolutionarily something that can occur. But we also know, even if you are within those communities, you have to go out to seek out resources, to seek out food and things like that. Like we know you have to go out to hunt or go out to like gather resources, or people may attack your community because you have an abundance of resources. Like if you are living a life that is good and positive and has a lot of stuff, that is something that people are going to want to take away for you for their own survival mechanisms. Given that that occurs, those people are very likely to bring in the zombie, like bring in the cordyceps fungus to you, or you are likely to unintentionally like get it when you're out gathering and bring it back into the community where it is incredibly likely to spread, where there is evolutionary incentives for it to be able to take over people. But no, to respond to the material about the zombie life and about how it's better to like live in the mycelia, to be one with the mycelia. A few things. Firstly, surely if life is suffering, right, it is better for the world to not exist at all. So actually the world you should support is Pokemon, because that will wipe out all of humanity a lot faster, because you have like 10-year-olds that have like gods and legendary Pokemon running around in their pocket. But no, we think the life also probably just is worth living. Like we go, if you like the reason that the harms that you want to point out in terms of people in the Hunger Games don't want to die, right? They do not want to experience these particular things. They do not want to, they do want to continue living. We think these are generally relatively positive things. Arguments about avoiding pain and stuff like that. Also, you lose out on pleasure. You lose out on goods and you lose out on your capacity to like engage in the world. But also no, you're very likely to harm the people around you in incredibly harmful ways. Like most people, even if they will not be aware of doing it, would not want to be a zombie, because then they would hurt the people they care about. If they live in one of these communities, they would not want to build bonds with the people around them and then go on to attack them. Jerry, could I have POI?
What's better, being forced to work countless hours like someone would in a prison yard, or maybe getting a bit sick and then having a chill time wandering around?
So we just don't think that like it's incredible. We don't think that's very likely for it to be like what happened. We don't think that's likely for what happens. And if you're claiming that like the cordyceps cordyceps fungus is going to like eventually evolve into something that humanity is capable of coexisting with, we just don't see that's the case, because cordyceps and these fungi are clearly capable of taking over brains, right? They clearly interact and feed on brain tissue. That's something that actually like probably they cannot overcome, given that they are auxotrophic, that they need to, heterotrophic, they need to consume stuff, right? That means that they therefore need to be consuming actively the material, the brain material that they're engaging with. Wiping out your brain probably wipes out you necessarily. There's no way in which you can continue to exist. Also, the only reason that we evolved to coexist with diseases is that you need to be able to spread the disease. And if you're dead, you can't do that. If you become a zombie, you're actually really efficient at spreading the disease. Therefore, that reason for diseases to evolve to become less like bad doesn't exist like in that world. It doesn't exist in that world. Next, quickly, to whip some material in terms of why Zootopia and Pokemon are so bad. Firstly, Zootopia is just really terrible because like you're a human, you're an eldritch abomination, like a real life human walking around with a bunch of cartoon animals. Nobody is ever going to want to love you. Nobody is ever going to want to engage with you. People are going to be really weirded out by the way that you communicate, the way that you make eye contact with a dog, and then they're like, you're threatening me, and you're like, I'm sorry, that's just built into my human brain for how I interact. Like those are particular kinds of things that will make it incredibly hard for you to socially integrate. A lot of those things are like go well beyond the kinds of like social differences that we see, like obviously between humans. This is like a fundamental actual biological difference that exists, right? This means that you're very likely to experience incredibly high levels of discrimination. You're never going to be able to live a life in which you can integrate into society. You're never going to be able to get a job. You're never have a family, get those things, give you meaning. Pokemon is just terrible because like, what if you like, I don't know if this is bringing things in, but what if your born as like Nurse Joy or something? That seems really messed up. But also just to the extent that world is constantly an existential threat. Like there are constantly people who want to take advantage of these want to take advantage of Pokemon to engage in harms to other people. That's not something you should want to engage with. Also like dog fighting is kind of messed up. It's probably really messed up to fight the Pokemon. We probably shouldn't do that. We probably wouldn't want to be born into that world. Cool. Thanks. And happy fictionals, guys.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech and call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the opposition bench.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Cheers. Just put your PYs in chat and I'll endeavor to take one from someone at some point. Probably closing. I'll try and see how they're justifying Zootopia. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate is genuinely incredibly depressing for the reason that every single other team in this debate is scrabbling around in horrible dystopias and horrible dictatorships. And what they're doing is pointing fingers at each other and saying, you get a few years more life. No, I get a few years more life. I live to 18, you live to 21. I live to 35, you live to 42. And none of that actually matters because the lives that everyone agrees each other will be living is horrendous. They are lives that simply are not particularly worth living. And if they are worth living, then the difference in the amount of lifespan you get is just incredibly marginal. So the reason that we will take this debate is very simple, because we're the only team with the imagination to get above the rat race of just arguing that everyone else's worlds are a little bit better, a little bit worse. How do we get above that rat race? In 2 reasons. First way we get above it is by explaining that zombie life is actually a really good one. It is a life of infinite pleasure, of infinite happiness, a life where you're liberated from all forms of suffering in the human world. And the only responses we really get are just appeals to intuition about body horror, that maybe this would feel really bad. Maybe you're not sure how it would go. But that just simply lacks the imagination to engage in this world. This is a world where you have ultimate autonomy. This is a world where you live forever, where you continue to get serotonin plugged into your brain by the Triceratops or whatever the fuck it's called, constantly making you happy. That is something that we think most people would choose, particularly in a context where they're all born into these terrible worlds. And the second thing we do to win this debate is we're the only team that talks about autonomy. For the simple reason that if you're going to die young, as probably everyone in this debate is, we would prefer that you use that time where you die young free. We'd prefer you use it wandering in the woods, looking at the ruins of cities. We'd prefer you use it loving, having sex, having kids, having fun, going around and seeing your friends and family and choosing what you want to do. Not living as slaves of Panem, or slaves of animals, or slaves of 10-year-old kids with Pokémons that can destroy the world. Those are not lives worth living. We are the only one that makes the years you get on Earth. Perhaps they are short. Perhaps they're not ones where you're likely to go on for very long, but they are certainly far more pleasurable than any other team is willing to engage with. So, 2 issues in this speech. First, life after death. Second, autonomy. First, life after death. I don't have to worry about talking about the other teams here because none of them will make a chance to engage with this. This is the most important issue of the debate. They're instantly out of it because none of them can give you anything after the death that everyone in this debate is certain to have. But us. Why can we give you a good life after death? 4 reasons. First, you're likely to live forever. As Jez explains, you're likely to succeed in living forever as part of this mycelium or whatever it's called. Second, you're liberated from the suffering that exists constantly. That is, you no longer experience pain. You no longer experience hunger or sadness or death. Third, you exist in a collective, and people do generally like being in collectives. They do like moving when someone else tells them to do it. They do like being able to be part of the system. Fourth, it actually makes you want it, right? Like it warps your brain chemistry such that this is something you enjoy. This is something you desire. This is giving you dopamine and serotonin and the other happy chemicals. So that is a life of absolute bliss. You're literally plugged into Bentham's pleasure machine and you are absolutely happy about it. Why should you weigh this highly? First, it's the largest scale impact in the debate. It is a pleasure machine. Second is for longest time. It is forever, whereas everyone else is just contesting small periods of time. Third, I would just implore you, resist the intuitive calls to like base human body horror that you're given from other teams. Make them give you structured, mechanistic reasons why this life is going to be bad. What do DP exam give us on that front? Not very much. They say 4 things. First, you can wipe out humanity faster in Pokemon. No, our argument is not about wiping out humanity. Our argument is simply that you can be part of a collective, part of something that's pleasurable. Second, they say, well, people want to live. Firstly, I'm not even sure people in these worlds would want to live. But secondly, even if they did want to live, this is just another form of life that is even better. Like it's unclear that living life in a different form is better. It's unclear that when you were given a heart transplant, you've become a different person. And so your life is no longer worth living. It's unclear that if we put your brain on the cloud, you'll not be worth living. This is the exact same thing. Third, they say, well, you would lose pleasure as well as losing pain. Untrue. Obviously, the machine, like the mycelium, would want to create your corporation. The way it does it is by providing dopamine. That's in the show. But even if you don't believe the show, obviously structurally that's likely to be the way it's going to regulate your behavior by providing dopamine to reward the nerve centers when they go out and do things it likes. Finally, they say you'd harm people around you. I just don't think you care because you're living such a blissful existence that bringing other people into that existence is something you think is a benefit. So we're the only team that gives you life after death. Clearly, we take that debate. But we then win this debate the second way over. And the way we win it is on autonomy. And this is clearly the thing you should weigh the highest. Because in this world, you're not likely to live very long. But we are likely to give you an existence that is going to be more free. That is one where you have freedom to exist. You have freedom to leave the place you were born and go travel the world. Go see it. Go try and find the best place to live. You have freedom to love. You have freedom to sing and to dance and to do whatever job you want. You have freedom to have autonomy and power and control of your own life, the things that people care most deeply about. Before I move on to explaining why we get more autonomy, I'll take closing.
If a rabbit and a fox can fall in love, why can't a monkey and a human fall in love?
So two problems with this. First, it is adjudicatory negligence to just let teams just import examples from Zootopia. Obviously, you have to give structural analysis as to why a rabbit and a monkey can fall in love. I'm sure you cannot do that. Come on, guys. This is how debating works. You can't just import from the movies. Obviously, you have to give structural analysis. I'm looking forward to explaining how that one works. Okay, why do we are the team that gives you the most autonomy? 4 things to know. First, we give you a lot of autonomy. You are able to exist in a world where you have the breakdown of society. That means you can go around and do whatever you want. It means you can do things like extract resources when they infinitely exist. And the responses we get from DPM are pretty weak. It's firstly, well, you see people die around you. Firstly, in many cases, you just might live in a community, in which case you won't see it. But if you are the person that doesn't live in the community, then you're probably desensitized to death. You've seen people as zombies all the time. It's probably something you're perfectly fine with. So in our world, you live in a post-scarcity wasteland. You're able to walk around, to do whatever you want, to do whatever you can see, to go to that new hill, that new horizon, to meet that new person, to have love with them. Maybe you die earlier, but you've certainly enjoyed it far more. Why does no one else get autonomy? Obviously, the Hunger Games doesn't, right? This is just slavery, right? And the only response to our arguments about slavery is, well, firstly, many people can live normally. No, they don't. They live in structured lives in controlled districts. They will never be able to rebel successfully for the reason Jez explains. So they have no fear, they have no autonomy, they're constantly controlled. And the second thing as well, there's too many people to surveil. That is, you can't surveil all of these people at once. You don't have the resources to do that. Literally no idea why. They don't have time to prove it now. I don't understand why the state doesn't have the capacity to send in peacekeepers in white clothes and stand around and watch you at all times while they force you onto the machines. Finally, why are the other two teams not getting any autonomy at all? Obviously, for Pokemon, you're having millions small dictatorships of 10-year-old children with weaponry that can destroy the world. Obviously, you are never able to get around their whims. The pressure of them being around is constantly on you. And Zootopia, firstly, you're probably killed and torn apart instantly. But even if you're not, you're always going to be the one human. That means you're constantly watched. You're constantly exceptional. That is no way to live. That is no pleasure. There's no fun in that. There's no value in that life. We are the only team that gives you value in your life, and we're the team that gives you a value after your life. That is clearly why we should take this debate.
Do I need to unmute or use the... Oh, am I audible? I mean, I wasn't really asking you, hey.
That's how we.
Wait, but haven't we've been using the...
Yeah, that's been going, goes through the speaker.
Oh, okay, so...
I thank the deputy leader of the opposition for that fine speech and call upon the governor to probably close the path of this debate.
I'm going to take the one insult that opening managed to mount against us, that we are a children's movie, and turn that into our greatest strength. We're a children's movie, which means we have no games to the death, no apocalyptic scenarios where civilization has broken down and your best alternative is submitting to the hive mind. And we are not the dog-eat-dog child soldier world where you have to battle for recognition and you have to battle for love. There's scarce little to say because it's really just the world we live in. In fact, it's just a diverse range of groups that live in a cosmopolitan, high-tech world that takes advantage of each person's unique capabilities and facilitates their unique needs. In fact, I think it's even better than the world that we live in. You're living with people, but instead it's even cooler because there's bunnies and tigers instead. I think obviously, even if this is a cartoon world and you are 2D, I still think you have capacity for human emotion. I think that pretty easily knocks aside the best of the case that we hear against us. I am convinced that our world is the best world ever because note how incredibly defensive the opening half of the debate has been. They have done scarce little to prove that their world is good, but I'm going to do that in my speech. Couple things here. First off, on why they're likely to, first off, on why this world is good. I'll address within there why it is possible for you to have family and friends and maybe even find love. And secondly, why above and beyond, even if this world is bad, in the worst case scenario, why you can still manage to find a good life. So first off, why is this world good? Couple things here. Firstly, safety. Note that there is no existential threat that is debate-winning material. I do not need to do any more work here unless somebody actively seeks to harm you. And note that psychopaths that are paranoid about safety are far more likely to exist in OG and OO. There is highly unlikely for you to encounter any sort of weird threat that ultimately ends your life. Some life is probably going to be good than no life whatsoever, where there is absolutely no debate. Other reasons why: police exist, the justice system exists, it's just everyday life. Secondly, why is this world good? The tech is even more advanced. That is to say, the style of living has to be so accommodating for animals of different sizes and different needs that there is so much technology. In fact, I think it's super cool there that it's probably far more likely to have even better medicine and even better entertainment as well. Shakira as an antelope, how fucking fantastic is that? Thirdly, I think people are going to be immensely accepting. A couple of reasons here. First off, note that they're incredibly likely to be used to diversity because there are so many different types of animals that are so vastly different. It is not the sort of difference as in like difference in skin color or difference in language. Note that they also speak the same language. How convenient is that? But they have massive differences in terms of the types of bodies that they have, in terms of the types of needs that they have. They literally, some of them are used to trying to eat each other. That is a history that they come from, but they have surpassed that and managed to reconcile themselves into an incredibly peaceful society. Note Zootopia also, which I think they are far more likely to be born into because the population density there is the highest, is the most integrated and most diverse city in the world. Okay, within here though, why specifically are you capable of having family and friends? Now, I think it's really important to try and question the preconceived notions that lead opening to try and latch onto this attack specifically. I think it's because we've been raised in an anthropocentric culture. You're told that you're better than a bird and a monkey because you think like a human. Note that this is ultimately an arbitrary cultural gap, especially at the point at which these are literally anthropomorphic animals that have similar value sets as we've seen from the cartoon movie. But I think also it's incredibly important to note that these monkeys don't have, like, for example, monkey centrism. I think we'd be fine in like a monkey society. For example, look at Tarzan. Ultimately, at the end of this, note that connection and love are ultimately based on empathy and understanding. It ultimately means if you spend time with people for long enough, you're likely to form a bond with them, especially when they've been raised in the same society as you. The cultural differences there are incredibly marginal at best. And even if people are initially attracted to you because of your like funky little look, I think that is perfectly fine at the end of the day. I think these differences are ultimately minimal. You're kind of just like a hairless monkey, which maybe even makes you a little bit sexier. For example, empirical evidence here, look at those like rabbits and foxes and also like that other like weird like couple in the lots of romance in Zootopia. It's fucking fantastic. No, okay. Preemption here, even if you find being a furry weird, I think it's important to note that these people are going to be born into this world. So there is no like barrier in that sense. The only barrier that could possibly exist is other people against you. And obviously that is untrue. I'll take opening.
Why does the actor care about a highly capitalistic and maybe techie world? And notably, even if they could access all the benefits of Zootopia, you don't structurally prove that they could because of, capitalist like hierarchies and stuff like that.
Okay, I think being poor in capitalism is better than being a zombie. I don't think I need to respond any more there. But fourth reason why the world is good, I think there's a lot of opportunity. You're not restricted, for example, specific careers and skills. And I think this means that the birth lottery is like relatively okay. Now I'm going to go above and beyond. Why is life still good, even if the rest of our material is taken down? One reason here, you have incredibly unique skills. And I think that is actually a real benefit that is likely to be taken advantage of because of the unique diversity that Zootopia is accustomed to. What sort of unique skills does this look like? It looks like, for example, opposable thumbs. It looks like having bigger brains. This means that like your chances of like succeeding academically within this world is probably even better. You can just take over the entire crypto market and make lots and lots of money. Okay.
Apart from that, you're also just like better at everything those animals want to do because they're anthropocentric and you are like literally what the model is based upon. You are like the god of this society. You're better at talking. You have opposable thumbs. You have all of those skills that they're highly unlikely to have. In fact, I think even if you have like a slightly funky look, and I think this is really where opening tries to like hinge all of their critiques that people will find you repulsive because you're hairless. I think in fact, because it's anthropomorphic, you are literally the beauty standard. I like refer to the empirical example of like Shakira as an antelope, who is like the hottest, like regarded as like the beauty standard within this like movie. She literally like looks like a human and she has like, you know, like nice. Yeah. Okay. For example, I think you could even like become a celebrity or like start a cult with your godlike intellect and your absolute beauty or even your strange look. I think the baseline is, even if you live in solitude forever in your comfy condo after fucking over the most small brain crypto market ever, I think this is an excellent alternative. Our worst case scenario is better than any best case scenario that they could perform. I think the like final thing to note here, note that this is like kind of building upon the love stuff that I talked about earlier. People are able to love people that look different from them, even if they are a unique minority. I refer to the fact that, for example, people do not fall in love with looks. People fall in love with who you are, even if you like come from like, for example, like people like fall in love across like racial boundaries. People fall in love with you even if you are like permanently disfigured or have like significant disabilities. They're accommodating for you because they recognize you as a person and they recognize your worth in that way. I think our worst case scenario ultimately is schoolyard bullying before you become a cult god. Everyone else's worst case scenario is either immediate death if you are like a loser of the birth lottery, or otherwise, in their best case scenario, being unable to like trust anyone else ever because they are either a competitor or they are a zombie or they are like somebody, another child soldier that is going to fuck you over with their ridiculous little animals. The average person wants food, shelter, and their life. We give that to them.
I thank the God member for that fine speech and call upon the opposition member to open the concluding part of the office debate.
My friends, am I audible? We go with yes. I'm going to start with the government bench, take down opening opposition, and then get on to the obviously extraneously good things about Pokemon. First of all, why Hunger Games sucks, and I think OO does most of the analysis here for us. It is a birth lottery. You're likely to be actively oppressed. There's no opportunity for social mobility. You have no hope. You are enslaved. Terribly, terribly bad conditions. Never back those. Why Zootopia sucks? Firstly, you're obviously just going to be ripped to shreds. Just because these people are anthropomorphized does not mean they cease to be animals. Tigers obviously dominate this society because they have like the most like apex predator power. They're going to fucking kill you as soon as you get there. Secondly, they tell you can form relationships. I'm sorry, panel, but everything is bestiality. You can't let them win on that. Thirdly, you have no common experience with these people. You cannot fit in. Modern society, which is what's feeded into the info slide as what Zootopia has to defend, is deeply, deeply exclusionary. Obviously, if you are one of a kind, you're going to be excluded. You can't just become like this god. Fourthly, on the question of children's show, they tell us, well, it's a children's show, so it's not bad. Okay, Pokemon is too. We're not destroying our world then either. That analysis doesn't actually hurt us. All right. Then onto the question of The Last of Us and opening opposition. It's a fucking zombie apocalypse. They try and mitigate all this material about dying early because they know that they're obviously going to die early. That's why they tell you it doesn't matter. So then they have two extraneous pushes as to why it doesn't matter that you die early. The first one is that you get autonomy, and the second one is that you get serotonin. Their pushes on autonomy are very simple. Jack comes up and tells us you can travel, you can love, you can sing, you can dance. Firstly, you can't fucking travel. You can't go outside. There's toxins in the air which are going to turn you into a zombie. Don't believe that you're going to be traveling the world having fun. Secondly, Pokemon is fucking based on traveling and discovering new things. If you care about travel, if you care about moving, if you care about dancing, singing, laughing, enjoying the outdoors, if you care about autonomy, you obviously care about Pokemon. You obviously vote CO. Their next concept is then that like you're going to be hooked up to the pleasure machine. Sorry to bring the real world into this, but that's not how serotonin works. You can have constantly high serotonin levels for about 3 days before you cease to feel anything, because happiness is derived from a delta, an increase in serotonin, not an objective abstract level of serotonin. So it takes about 3 days for you to max out on that level. By their analysis, you would just believe that people could do serotonin increasing drugs all the time in status quo and society would be perfectly healthy. Obviously, we don't do that. Obviously, the average reasonable voter doesn't sign up to be hooked up to the pleasure machine, because at best case, you get 3 days of happiness before the increase in serotonin is actually lethal. So like at the best case, they have 3 happy days of their life on opening in opposition. Obviously, they try and lie to you and tell you that living doesn't matter because they live for about 3 days or they become a zombie. It's deeply, deeply inhuman because every other team in this debate is deeply inhuman. OG shows us the worst inhumanities of capitalism. OO shows you literally inhuman zombies. CG shows you fucking animals everywhere and no humans. Obviously, humans are conditioned for humanity. You should pick the world which is most like humanity. If that claim that humans are built for humanity doesn't make sense to you because your brain has been rotted by a need for structural reasons, here are a couple. Firstly, it's been built by humans to serve a functional purpose. I'm not defending that current humanity is perfect, but I'm saying it has an objective utility that you can note and it's built for you. Secondly, it just gives you the most autonomy. And I know this is what OO tries to claim. I'm going to explain a bit later in this speech why Pokemon gets that most autonomy. But first, I'm going to defend us from those vicious attacks of the opposition bench. Fuck off, Jez, you're in OO. Firstly, on the violence of Pokemon. The claim from OO on the violence of Pokemon is that it will be like nuclear weapons and there'll be constant war. Note panel, we have nuclear weapons in status quo. What they fail to prove is any delta of change with the status quo. All their analysis is deeply symmetric. There are weapons which could end humanity tomorrow, but there is no incentive to use them because we humans do not want humanity to end, which further disproves my analysis on why we like humanity. So their delta is deeply unclear because these Pokemon exist if they are absolutely their worst case, like nuclear weapons, we haven't used them yet. It's unlikely they're going to be used. The claim that then responds to this is like, extends to this, is that there's going to be 10-year-olds running around with nukes. They tell us we need structural reasons. Obviously, structurally, these will be controlled by the US government. Like they're going to take these from their kids. Pretty clear to me that they're not going to be used randomly. Thirdly, sadly, there's this incredible power, but world-changing. They never prove that Pokemon have an incentive to destroy the world. Pokemon obviously get along with humans very well. They have this symbiotic relationship. They're like pets. Your dog doesn't want to destroy the world, neither does your Pokemon. Thirdly, there's just an tension on the entire government bench because they tell you that we live by cartoon rules, but that doesn't apply in Pokemon where we're going to blow up the entire world. Oh, but it's okay to live by cartoon rules on their side of the world. Obviously, that's just not true. If we are living in the real world, we give you the reasons why these Pokemon won't be used at their worst. If we are living in a cartoon world, obviously we're not blowing up the entire world. We don't have to defend that. So, why Pokemon is good extraneously. I'll give you 3 extraneous reasons which don't necessarily match to other things in this debate. Then I'm going to win on the biggest clash in this debate, which is autonomy. Firstly, it's just the most like the real world. You have normal things. You don't have this abstract external force like animal civilization or zombies or anything like that. It's just the most familiar to us. Obviously, you support it. Secondly, it's built on positive relationships. People have fun, enjoyable, happy relationships with their pet Pokemon. The worst, most extreme Pokemon are probably controlled by the US government, but you probably have your local friendly Pokemon which you engage in relationships with. Also, thirdly, if we are doing this like in a fictional world, the bad guys in Pokemon Team Rocket are fucking incompetent. They never do shit. They don't beat anyone. It's clear that Pokemon have a revealed preference for being good. That's why they lose when they're with the bad guys. Obviously, they're going to be really nice. I'll take opening if they have something.
By real world logic, a wild Charizard could burn down your house or a Geodude could flatten a city. Isn't that kind of characterization simply significantly worse when one bad actor can do this?
Literally just catch them all. Skill issue. Just get them. Sorry, it's so clear that we have Pokemon, we have an ability to capture them. Charizard doesn't go around burning down everybody's houses in Pokemon. Not going to be doing it here. Obviously, we still maintain the dominant structural force of humans, which is the clearest benefit on CO. Literally just catch them. All right. On then to the question of autonomy. The world of Pokemon is a pretty nice one where teenagers safely walk the streets, they spend time outside, they enjoy the world. I think a world full of teenagers who are Ash Ketchum, who have a desire, who want to help the world, who want to be better, is vastly better than a world full of teenagers who are zombies, a world full of teenagers who murder each other in the Hunger Games, or a world full of, like, there's no teenagers in Zootopia because they're fucking animals. All right. This is the only world in which you can still change your conditions. This is the autonomy push. In OG, you can't do shit because of the state actively oppressing you. In OO, you can't go outside for the zombies. In CG, you are one of a billion, and even then you're probably ripped apart from first principles. It's important to matter that no matter where you are, we don't even need to prove social mobility is important. We're the only world where you could even conceive of being socially mobile, where you could even conceive of being human, where you could even conceive and have the hope which sustains you, the hope which gives you the power to keep moving, to keep existing, and the hope that you'll have a happy life, which is why it's so obvious to vote CO.
I thank the opposition member for that fine speech and call upon the Gov Whip to conclude the Gov bench.
I'm going to begin with our extension because it clearly wins us this debate. Because we are the only team which actually proves why our world is good instead of shitting on everyone else. So why is it that Zootopia is good? A number of reasons. Firstly, it is just the safest society. There is no zombie apocalypse. There are no people out in the streets beating children or sending them to death matches. But secondly, there's just technology, which means that you are able to access things like healthcare. We explain all of this to at Hoi An. The only response comes in a POI, which is that maybe you can't access these benefits because of capitalism. A number of responses. Firstly, we preempt this when we prove that the fact you have a unique skill set, i.e. the fact you have a brain size bigger than literally everybody else, means that you have an intelligence which makes you likely to succeed. But secondly, it's the fact that anthropomorphism is based on you, which means the kinds of feelings you have, the kinds of belief systems and rationality that you have, you are likely to be expert in. You are the model for all behavior. But secondly, we just explain to no response that you are incredibly novel as a human being within this world. And you could probably start a cult. You could probably convince people that you are the son of God, you are some like new being, and therefore you can just attract followers who can give you money and you can benefit in that way. Why is it necessarily important then that you can access all of these benefits, i.e. safety and technology? Why do they matter? Because I think the average reasonable person just cares about quality of life. They care about having enough money to put food on the table. They care about having a purpose, having a family, having community. The greatest attack we get from every team in this debate is that within this world, you are alien and therefore you are unlikely to kind of gain connections. A number of reasons this argument falls apart. The first is that the context of this society is one where all of these animals lived together. Therefore, there's likely to be a level of interspecies mingling, right? So I think these animals are probably likely to just understand that different mutations happen and people look different. I think the fact that all of these anthropocentric beings are able to interact and probably create like weird morph babies means that people are just desensitized to the idea of like difference and someone looking a bit weird. Like you probably could just like have a monkey have a baby with another animal that looks probably similar to a human, right? But secondly, I think the fact that all of these animals are anthropocentric means that this difference doesn't really matter as much because the point at which you're interacting with different people and different species every single day means that the thing that you care about is the rationality, right? Like we as humans make fun of animals and use them and instrumentalize them and think they're different because they're non-anthropocentric, because we don't think they can reason, because we don't think they can think, because we don't think they can feel in the same way we do. That is why we discriminate against them. At the point at which you believe, and these animals believe that you are the same, it is unclear to me why this discrimination happens. But even if you are discriminated by most people in society, we are still able to win. First, because there are just people who connect with personalities and people's like identity beyond the way they look, which is just a piece of mitigation, which I think is important. But secondly, you can just start your own family with things like adoption, right? I think it would be incredibly harmful to say you cannot, like the connection you have with an adopted child is not real or not meaningful. At the point at which you can do that, you can access the kind of benefits that any other team can make. What attacks are lodged against us? The first is that you'll just be ripped to shreds by tigers. This misunderstands anthropocentrism, right? Like we don't go out in the streets and see a baby and we're like, I'm going to kill that thing because we are anthropocentric and reason and think. These tigers are anthropocentric, which means they reason in the same way, which means they don't see a baby and suddenly think, I'm going to eat that thing. But secondly, there's just a justice system within this world. Why? Because humans care about justice vis-a-vis the status quo, look around. But secondly, because obviously in a world in which, no thank you, you're interacting with different species, you have the incentive to make sure that like you have control over tigers, right? Like at the point at which different animals are existing with them, have the incentive to care about them. All of that proves that we ensure the quality of life of these individuals in a way that no other team does. This is what the average person cares about. They don't care about having a television in The Last of Us. They don't care about maybe having a bag of Cheetos that they found on the street walking through a slum. What they care about is the ability to have family, to have connection, to have technology. That's what we bring them. Let's deal with opening government. Are you likely to live well? Are you likely to be safe? They say two things. Firstly, there's a possibility that you're born into a good district with wealth. Is this likely? No. Why? Because there are 13 districts and the capital is one of the smallest populations. But secondly, even if you're born in a better off district, which is something which creates technology, the risk of you going to the Hunger Games probably means that your entire childhood is soul crushing because you wonder every single year whether or not you're going to be sent to a death camp. But secondly, there are career facilities, which means you just have no freedom. Secondly, maybe you're born into a nice district, still terrible, still having to deal with things like poverty, starvation, and abuse. Maybe you're born in the capital. Take them at their very, very best. No other team does. I think every single minute of your life is under capital control, which means you have no choice, you have no agency. You cannot speak about things that you like in case snow comes and kills you and your family. You are at the whim of a dictator. That is not a life, even if you have it. Secondly, they say the world can be changed through revolution and revolt. Firstly, so incredibly unlikely. Why? First, because the state has a full monopolization on violence and conflict. Under the status quo through democracies, we vote, and that's how that interchange happens. Snow and the government just control everything. They control violence, they control the government, they control like the military. But secondly, think about how a revolution did happen. It required like a crazy number of steps and a very number of specific circumstances and a number of very, very specific nuanced things happening. The chances of it happening again in the same way is incredibly small. That's OG out. Let's deal with opening opposition. First, of your life as a human. And let's be super charitable and say you were born in a safe environment. No idea why you are, but let's accept. Why do they still lose? First, actually, yeah, I will take you, Jack.
Sure. So why wouldn't the high-tech institutions and justice system and CIA of this world capture you and extract all of the value that you guys talk about from this human, which is literally what humans do to animals in our world? That is anthropocentric.
No, the reason we exploit animals right now is because we don't consider them as human. We don't consider them with the ability to reason and imagine. We dehumanize them, and that's why we exploit them. At the point at which they perceive you in the same anthropocentric way, they are unlikely to do that. But also, I'm unclear what extracting you for your resources actually means. Like, you can't be milked. I genuinely don't understand what kind of work you could do there. Super strange. Why does opening opposition lose? They say you are autonomy and you are human if you're alive. No, you are a prisoner. You cannot leave your probably bunker at the risk of being killed. You are literally for your entire life locked up in a series of concrete walls. That is not a life. You are consumed by fear. They say you can access entertainment because of overproduction. Apocalypse happened, guys. Probably not very likely that you were able to access these things. They say a cure is on the way. Firstly, I think that's incredibly speculative, but the things they rely on are like genetic evolution, which does not happen in a single person's lifetime. Sure, a cure might come, but not for this person. Let's talk about their life as a zombie. They say you'll live forever and with autonomy. No, you don't. You lose control over your body. You are not in control of your emotions. You cannot access the things which make you feel things. Like if you can't feel pain, you can't feel the things which lead to pain, like love, like hope, like life. That is an existence I would want to have. That's them out. Let's do with closing opposition. They do nothing to defend their world. They say, maybe you build positive relationships with these animals. Why? Like you own them. You're instrumentalizing them. Why would they like you? Then they say there's a risk. We say there's a risk of Pokemon doing terrible things. So like just catch them all. That's such a cop-out. That's the whole point of the show. You can't catch them all. And then they're like, nukes already exist. Obviously, it's worse to have more of them. CG wins.
I thank the God Whip for that fine speech and call upon the opposition whip to conclude this debate.
Starting in 3. Am I audible, by the way? Assuming, yeah. Everyone else has. Cool. Take that as a yes. Starting in 3, 2, 1. What CO has managed to catch in this debate was ultimately the winning side and the clear, decisive world that we would choose to live in. I'll start by defending our extension because apparently we don't have one. We actually have four different things that we are able to prove that we have unique benefits, or benefits that at least are the most likely under our side. What are these? What exactly is our extension then? Firstly, it's most like the real world. I think it is just an objective fact that humans would prefer to live in a world that is clearly built for humans, right? It means that growing up, you do not have to develop the basic necessities of human life. You do not have to develop unique medicines for yourself like you would have to in Zootopia. You do not have to develop like unique technologies to survive, right? Like in The Last of Us. And you do not have to like live under the constant fear of an oppressive state like under the Hunger Games. But secondly, we do just have the positive, fun relationships that you can have with Pokemon. I think it's an important comparative here is our relationship with cats and dogs, right? They try to suggest that we can't have a positive relationship with these animals, but we do just have positive relationships specifically with domesticated creatures, which once caught, these Pokemons are. Thirdly, though, I think it's really, really important that autonomy has been weighed very heavily in this debate. And what world is more autonomous than the one where children or 10-year-olds have the ability to actively like deny their oppressors or actively like have a function and say in the world? All right, I'll start with just some like brief rebuttal to OG, then move on to OO, and then finally onto CG with a bunch of different things. So what does OG tell us? OG tells us OG has a couple responses initially to Pokemon, or the world in Pokemon, right? I think they have this contradictory claim, which is like discussed by Xavier, where they suggest that either it's a cartoon world or it's a world in which we're like the world is completely ending and is being self-destructed, right? I think this inherently is at odds with one each other and is inherently tense. However, we need to also consider the fact that the individuals who are getting these Pokemon, the individuals who are controlling these Pokemon do live in this world and have an active incentive for this world to continue, right? They're gaining these Pokemon and are choosing to like collect these Pokemon because they want to like continue their life on this world, even if it is with a different like level of power dynamic. They ultimately are unlikely to be destroying the like cities which they live in, the resources which they need to survive, and the like healthcare and system, and then like the just stores in which they like shop to like provide general sustenance for their life. Secondly, there was this idea about like a normal life. So under the metrics provided to us by OG, right? The main thing was that they have this push that it's like, actually, this is a normal life. Similarly, our world was also built for humans too, and just does have the ability to like have things like stores, have resources and just a general structure of things that we would normally see. But uniquely, we are not forced into labor in our state. In fact, we have so much autonomy that children are able to like roam through different like biomes and just travel through the world, right? And so as a result, we are not forced into labor, but actually like a quite interesting life of travel and adventure, right? Beyond this, though, we do just have this like general like slightly like classless system because of the fact that each individual now has like a unique comparative power to be able to like claim Pokemon and have control, and it is no longer dependent on like who you were born into or the family you were born to, or specifically like the location you were born into. They also then provide this like general idea that you're able to like fight the oppressors uniquely under the Hunger Games, whereas existential threats don't exist, right? Note under the Hunger Games, states do just have a clear monopoly on violence, right? Given the admittance that the Hunger Games is so horrible, and the fact that they continue suggests that these states do in fact have like some ability to prevent the 13 districts from uprising, right? They also patrol these regions and actively like prevent any sort of uprising. Under our side, by OG's own characterization, right, even 10-year-olds once again have the ability to fight their oppressors. So if we're looking for like the ability to like fight against like revolution or whatever, we're ultimately seeing that under our side we do just have the like most likely ability to do so. I'll take a point from you guys. Yeah.
If you're bad at Pokemon catching, like the tens of millions background characters that are not in the show, how do you actually maintain autonomy in terms of security and success?
Yeah, I think that just continues by like just traveling the world, right? I think a lot of the Pokemon world is just like empty space or space that is not like densely populated, right? And so as a result, you just get to enjoy your life as an adventurer trying to catch Pokemon. And sure, maybe you fail. Sure, maybe your Pokemon gets stunned. But at the worst in the situation, right, is that like ultimately your Pokemon is stunned. You go back to a medical center and just like re-heal them, right? Moving on to OO, because I think this is probably the one that like is the least defensible world, right? I think we have a situation here where they try to present this idea of like autonomy being weighed very, very highly, right? Note that you're born into this world, right? So if you're an individual where you were born into a world where you are like actively having like these different monsters and infectious creatures actively like attacking you, you're probably unlikely to have any sort of autonomy and to like protect yourself and keep yourself safe. You're dependent on your parents. You're dependent on whatever family you're born into, right? Under our world, even children have the ability to protect themselves. They have the ability to defend themselves, and they have the ability to like actively maintain the quality of life that is required. We think likely, in fact, you're more likely to have a situation where you have autonomous life in which you can like roam and fly on your Pokemon and all these different things that are just like benefits, unique benefits to our side. Right? They try to suggest that you can like live your life and roam around the destroyed cities or whatever, the remains of the cities, I think it's important to note, I think I'd much rather roam the world where we have like Pokemon just chilling and like exploring and catching them than a world in which you're eating out of 20-year-old tuna cans and you're probably like facing decrepit molding buildings. Then they make this like unique zombie push. I think we give you a great response to that in terms of like serotonin being something that like is ultimately depleted, right? And you get like you can build an immunity to this. But even if that wasn't the case, the very nature of these zombies is that they are hungry, right? Hunger is an infinite problem now. So now you are constantly hungry. You have to live for the rest of your life actively trying to seek this. And it is going to be a nightmare in that situation because you have a meaningless existence where you're constantly chasing the high of like human flesh that you will ultimately either run out of or be eliminated from and killed from. Right, now moving on to CG. CG tells us a couple of things. Firstly, they tell us like the power of friendship and how we're going to have like be loved with animals. I think 3 responses to this, right? Firstly, you are likely to be killed. I think they are in fact carnivorous animals that need to eat in this world. So what happens when a new species that they have limited exposure and emotional connection arrives, right? That is just lion food. That is exactly what is most likely to happen. But if we do not believe that, and we believe that for some reason they are going to keep you around, right? Minority groups in the status quo are not the cult leaders or not the people who are loved and revered, right? I think the difference is you were made into a spectacle for others, and you are now like seen as more of like a freak or like a different creature, right? That you were exploited into, right? You're a medical mystery. You were experimented on. You were investigated, and as a result, you were seen as a strange thing. Particularly if you were seen as like some like godlike creature that is so beautiful, right? I think it's likely that all these individual like animals are going to try and attack you. This is probably the biggest push that they have at CG, where it's like you have a larger brain, so you have like specialized labor and whatnot. I think there are 2 things that need to be considered. Firstly, if the animals are conscious, right, and there is like a relatively small comparative advantage, right? You're probably going to represent like a Godzilla-like threat, right? And so they're just going to like try to take you down. They're going to try and take you down for the rest of your life. And you have to live your life either 1, where you are taken down, or 2, in which you live your life constantly defending against this. Even if this isn't the case, a life of being like the most intellectually superior creature is going to be one that is incredibly depressing. It is going to be one filled with solitude, one with loneliness, because you no longer have a connection with any of these creatures because you're just far more intellectually superior. We are so happy to oppose.
Okay.